welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I am interviewing a fine artist, curator, educator, originally from Denver, Colorado, living in Washington, D.C. Her work is largely focused on mixed media portraiture of American life, including themes of motherhood and culture. Please welcome Zsudayka Nzinga Terrell. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
See, I actually worked on that. I prepped that multiple times before.
I heard. I don't know if you saw it because they can't see my face, but I was like, oh, pop it.
So, it's just energy. It's like meeting relatives sometimes. You know how it is? Like meeting cousins. So for the fine folks who are undipped, uninitiated, give me the vital stats. I read that you started to paint in acrylic around 8 years old. Can you share a little bit more about your background?
Well, no, I was an artist forever. And so, when I was 8, I was making earrings for the kids at my school, taking their lunch money. I've been a hustler since day one. But I've just evolved in my process. So, back then I was working with, I had my little crayons and colored pencils and I was hooking up their little jewelry that way. I was always really good with charcoal. So I was always like the art class star. I could do, I could draw a lot of realism and things like that. But I actually got my start doing spoken word poetry. So, when I was probably 15, 16, there was like a big boom in the world with spoken word. There was like this spoken word renaissance, and I've always been a writer. And so I started touring. I started writing my poems and performing everywhere. I was on slam teams and I was doing my thing and I was touring, and I wanted to come out with a book of my poetry. And I first had a friend, Keith Parker. He did a cover for me for one of my books and it was fire. But then my mom was like, yo, you paint, because I was secretly like paint on the side. And I'm gonna be real, I had no idea what I was doing. I went and got some water soluble oils, because I was like, everybody who's a great painter is an oil painter. And I got some regular oils, and I was raw dog painting with the oils with no thinner, just raw dogging the oil on the canvas, which, I calculate like how much money I probably wasted raw dogging oils on the canvas. Just terrible. But I had these like little pieces that I was secretly doing on the side. And so she was like, why don't you put your work on one of your covers? And so the next 2 books I had, I put my work on the cover, but nobody knew. I didn't tell anybody it was my work. I wasn't really that confident in it. And so when I went back home, I started a Black Arts Festival in Aurora, Colorado. And the first day of the festival, one of my vendors didn't show up. And so it's a gap in the layout. I don't know if you've ever done like special events where it's market and festival, but you have everybody scheduled where they're supposed to be. The last thing you want is a gap in the layout. And it was a gap in the middle of the main field of the layout. So my mom said, run home, go get your art and just put it in this space so that it's a continuous flow. Yes. And so that was the first time I ever like showed art. And, I put pieces up and people were like, oh, I like this. And honestly, it was terrible. Like I had, it was very hit or miss back then. Like right. I would have one piece that I would be like, this is good enough for me to continue trying to like work on this. And then the rest, it was just a mess. But it was a very positive experience for me. And that led to me, I ended up joining this art collective in Denver called the Sankofa Art Collective. And I will never forget, she's blowing up now, Dawn Williams Boyd. And she was like one of the people that was in the can you get into Sankofa process. Yeah. She was like, you're not very good right now, but I think that you have the potential to be. Yeah. And so, they let me in, and just being around all those artists really inspired me and really, really grew me to start to try to figure out art. So I painted in oils until I got to DC, and then I met my husband. And at that time I was painting live a lot, and he's an acrylic painter. And he was like, homie, it's really kind of ridiculous for you to be like trying to paint an oil painting in 2 hours on stage at an event. Like, that's just not how oil paint works. You should try acrylic. And, so I started like dabbling in his supplies, and it dries faster. And
Yes.
that's what I needed. Less chemicals, it's safer around the kids and things like that. And so that's how I started with acrylics.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. It's always interesting to see when someone has a different medium that they are working in, different creative pursuit that they're working in. And then it's just like, well, this is how I got here though. So like for me, before delving into like audio, I was a writer writing terrible raps when I was in high school, and then kind of poetry and things like that. But, I realized recently, or rediscovered recently, that I always was kind of that person that could present and be in front of a thing and kind of craft and direct a story. So being a master's of ceremony multiple times, and kind of not the person that wants to get up there and say, "Hey, brothers, dig that." None of that. I can't do that. I used to have a lot of hair too, so it was just the bad aesthetic. But yeah, just kind of seeing where a person was at and what they were doing, and where they're at now. So tell me about Shigiri, and about your process from conception to creation when it comes to your practice now.
So collage has always been something that I kind of did on the side. And they were always kind of two separate things for me, of like, oh, I'm painting. And then like every now and again, I'll cut something out of a magazine and do a collage. So I love collage. I love the assemblage of different entities and images and bringing them together. I love how it comes across. And I'm also very into like quilt work. I learned how to quilt when I was very little. My mom is a seamstress. And so she taught me how to quilt very, very little. So like just the idea of like the assemblage of small pieces, like making something bigger, has always really intrigued me. So I got introduced. I can't even remember who introduced me. And I don't even think it was introduced. I think one day I was like, I'm going to make a portrait and I'm going to tear the pieces because I couldn't find my scissors. And you know how sometimes
so frustrated. Where are my scissors?
Right? I was like, I wasted like an hour of studio time. And, like sidebar, I have a bunch of small kids. So an hour of studio time looking for some scissors is like devastating. So I just got to a point where I was like, I can't find scissors. I'm gonna just tear the pieces. And so, I did this, and it was a portrait, and it just came out fabulous. And it was a lot softer than my painted work. My painted work at that time, I was doing a lot of kind of reminiscent of stained glass, like really hard angled, really thick black lines within the portraiture. Yeah. And so, I started to like evolve this style of like tearing the paper. And then in researching it, I found out that that's a thing. And it's called shigiri, and it's a Japanese form of doing collage work. And so I was like, oh, like this is cool how like things kind of can evolve naturally for you, and then you can find out the importance of what it is to other cultures and how other cultures utilize it. Yeah. So for a long time, a lot of my work, and I still do a lot of work, like I'm working on an installation piece right now that's heavily based in tearing the paper. And what I love about the torn paper is just like the softness in the edges. It allows for a blending that I think is really special and is really organic.
Like that. I like how, see, this shows you where your greatness is at, right? Where it's like, yeah, I was just looking for some scissors, and then you just stumbled into this ancient Japanese method. Look at you out here.
You gotta just open up, right? And let whoever gotta come through you come through you.
Absolutely. It's just like, look, where am I? Says, oh, look, I discovered this. This is what I do now. So what do people, in terms of the listeners, what do people need to know about you and about how you think, how you create, and how you understand like the world around you, and in what ways would that help them appreciate your art?
Oh, okay, so this is an open-ended question, and I can ramble. So please feel free to
I'll put you on the clock then.
Interrupt me and jump in. I think that for me, one of the most important things about my work is I consider myself kind of an anthropologist in how I'm assessing culture and how I'm expressing culture, because I think that we're in a really interesting era where the concept of Blackness has been allowed to expand beyond just a conversation of like race and into a conversation about what is our culture. And I think that in my generation, we were probably one of the last generations to be kind of raised on the idea that there is no Black culture, but there's like this Pan-Africanism. And I think there's a rejection of that happening right now, where it's like, actually, I grew up in a very rich culture that is a very specific thing to my experience in America and how I engage my ancestors and thinking about where I came from. And so, that's one of the most important aspects of my work is wanting to communicate cultural experiences in a way that's accessible to everybody. So we can all see the ways that like we connect and the ways that we relate. But I'm also like really fascinated by how dominant Black culture is in American culture, of like, all of this is us. Like, they want to say our words, they want to wear our clothes, they want our hairstyles, they love our art. Like, and so really like thinking about like how the possibility of our artwork to redefine what is America. America's always been seen as this melting pot of whiteness that then like has these pockets of Blackness. But like, what if America's actually a melting pot of Blackness that has pockets of whiteness? Because like a lot of these things that are happening now or that people do now come from us. So I'm really interested in reflecting that in my work. I am not an artist who does trauma-based Black work. I think I have one painting that's like a trauma-based Black art painting, and it's from like 15 years ago. I really want to talk about other stories. Like, we didn't all grow up trying to escape poverty and gangs and whatnot. Some of us grew up in like really different environments and really different styles of households. I grew up in the Midwest. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom was a teacher. I grew up around a lot of different types of people, but I grew up in a household that was very entrenched in celebration of Black culture. And that is something that's very special to me. And so like, though, I think that those are some of, to me, what are the most important things that I want people to get from me. And then I'm going to stop talking and let you.
No, I think that's important, and I agree with you. Like in almost everything that you said there. Not that I'm disagreeing with anything, but I think that at times there's this subtle erasure of what, and sometimes more than subtle erasure of what a Black person is and what their contributions are and all of that stuff to this country. And there is a approved Black narrative, an approved Black story. And I used to do a podcast called Unofficially Black, with, one of my good friends, Greg, and we just looked at it like, we're into wrestling and anime and things like that. It's like, how are we not Black guys? like this is not like acceptable, what have you. And, kind of exploring that, it eventually devolved into us just saying a bunch of like weird off-color jokes, but still, it's one of those things. I appreciate you kind of saying that and speaking on what your experience is, because I think every person's experience as a Black person in this country is a valid thing, regardless of what it might look like. And I think there are people that don't really see that are in that position to say it or have said it. We've gotten this programming of, where do I fit at in this conversation? Why is my Black voice not as valid as this approved Black voice?
Absolutely. And I think that for me, it's funny because as I watch like this shift in media and this shift on, I like how you called it the quote unquote approved Black narrative, right? I think that what happens is like a lot of us who don't speak to a certain narrative get caught in this echo chamber outwards where we're assigned these identities of like, like I'm considered a conservative Black person. I get called like bed wench and coon. I don't know if I can say those words.
No, please do. Please do. Those are...
But like I get called those type of things like all the time. And I just be like, and I'm like, and it's funny to me because I'm just like, I love Black people more than like most of the people I know. Like everything I do is about Black people. And like, and then Hotep's the other thing, the other like derogatory, y'all are Hoteps. Because, we unschool our kids and we had our babies at home. But like, like my kids, we at the house, like really submerged in our culture and really enjoying our culture. And we're raising our kids to love and enjoy and embrace our culture. And our artwork is reflective of that. Both me and my husband have like a pride in Blackness and like a love in Blackness. And like just wanting to push back on like, why is there not space for that? Like, why does everything have to always be centered in, it gotta be drama, it gotta be like, no, there's Black folks, we having dinner together, all at the table, me, my husband, our children, and we got our Africa clock on the wall, and we got Adinkra symbols and masks hanging up on the wall, and we got, like we are representing who we are. And I just think that it's important to have alternative narratives.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that this podcast is really about. It kind of came out of just having the more holistic and or quote unquote an alternative narrative to how people talk about Baltimore. Baltimore is a city that is
The Wire.
But Baltimore is a city that's 66% Black. And whenever I hear these things, I'm like, no, you're just talking about Black people. It's a way to try to wedge that in there because every city has these different issues. Some worse than what might be seen here, but we will give them the grace to talk about their culture and what they may represent and not do the same thing for here in other cities that tend to have a really high population of Black folks and people don't see it. It's really odd to me. And going back to one of the things she said, I thought was really interesting where you can hear the coon thing, and then you can hear the hotep, which to me feels like they're very opposite things. It's like, how can you be both?
How?
Just like, what do you mean? I mean, but I've heard things of back in the day, like I worked in an office, and it's like, oh, you're like Carlton Banks. I was like, you can eat a dick, but I remember I had a job, and it was. I had a job, like I'm unemployed. I had a job where it was like me and three other Black dudes, and we were the only Black dudes on the team, and we're all in the same area, and we all work in data, but we were moved into the same area. We weren't sitting together initially. And I used to have this theory, and it's still there. I think I'm tweaking it, but it's like there's a theory there's only so many allowable Black guys in the office, certain archetypes. And I'm just like, I feel like, which ones are we? That was the question I was doing. I was sitting there pondering it. And I was like, I'll get back to work. I'll explore that later. But when you see it right in front of you, it's just like, oh, this is how y'all look at us. This is interesting.
I relate to that so much. Like growing up in Denver, which Black person am I is like the A1 question when you enter the room of like, and I would feel that in class. I would feel that in things that I was invited to. And, like, I don't want to date the podcast, but it's February, it's Black History Month. And so like Black History Month is like Millionaire Month for Black people who like perform and do things. And so I would feel that when I would get invited to things too, like, I'm about to make $30,000 in February going to different universities doing my Huey P. Newton poem and like
where's my
quoting Martin Luther King.
I mean, look, I'll leave that because it's some things that are really funny where like my boy Greg, I just remember because I believe Black Panther came out in February, and I just remember just people showing out just how many like fake dashikis were being worn. I was like, look, none of y'all look good in these. And Greg is light skinned, and the colors were like Golden State Warriors colors. And I was like, what are you doing? I was like, excuse me? And I was like, can you get a real one? Like, what? Like, why? You're not going to wear that again, are you? Like, look,
I'm going to tell you my Black Panther story.
Yeah.
I was pregnant with my third child, and I get hella sick when I'm pregnant, like the whole time. It's a terrible time for me. And I get hella fat. Like I can't eat anything and I still seem to just get fat. So I'm mad. I'm uncomfortable. I can't fit nothing. Fuck a dashiki. And everybody in their dashikis. My husband was like, come on, let's go out on a date. And, everybody's going to see Black Panther. We're going to go see Black Panther. So I took my big, pregnant, angry behind out, and we went to the Magic Johnson Theater. So it was the blackest experience I could possibly have in Maryland. Like everybody black. I stood in line for like 45 minutes with a bunch of folks in dashiki ball gowns and whatnot. And they ran out of popcorn. And I sat in there and I was so pregnant and I was like crying. And my husband was like, can you please get yourself together? Like, well, I was just like, you don't have no popcorn. And everybody just got on their dashiki. He's like, how can? This movie's not even that good. I was so mad the
Shocker.
whole time.
But that's what it is, though. I think that speaks on like just the response around it and just what people wanted in terms of like, even just based on what the attempt was, Black people wanted it because we need something to kind of look at and say, all right, that's in the best way. This is fictional Africa, but it's Africa. And I
couldn't even hate on the art of it. Yeah. I think that was probably like the storyline. I was annoyed. But the art of it and the Afrofuturism being expressed to such a wide audience, I felt like it was actually one of the first times that the idea of technology was presented from a Black or an African perspective. And to me, that was what was important, or that was what was revolutionary. And it was like reassuring that as an artist, thinking about the message of your art matters. Like what you're trying to put out, it really matters. And like, are we thinking about, what is the difference between art that's focused in the past, art that's focused on trauma, art that's focused on present times, and art that's focused on the future, or art that is moving into a future of a different way in which we engage the conversation about who we are and what our identities are.
It's big. I like how in letting you roll, you're answering like all of my questions. I like that.
I'm sorry.
No. It works because it comes off even more natural. It's like, yeah, here's the other thing. It's like you had the questions already. So let's see. So I read that you consider your studio practice to be cultural anthropology with an aim to capture and archive the history and culture of Black Americans. Why? And I think you covered it, but maybe hammer it in. Why were you drawn to that as a subject outside of the obvious? I'm a Black person, but like, why were you drawn to that?
So, I want to start off with saying, like, when I was a kid, because I grew up in a suburb of Denver, so it wasn't a bunch of us. There was 2 Black businesses in downtown Denver, and that was a Kente Express and Human Bookstore. And every Saturday, my parents would drag us to this building where these stores were, and I mean, we would see Phil Valentine lectures and like just. But you walk in and it's mud cloth on the walls and incense burning and Fela Kuti is playing, and upstairs they got all this Black art and all this Black fabric. And so I think that coming into the understanding that my community is a vibe, when I go to people's houses, that it's the same thing. Like I love going to Black people's houses because like you come in and it's just like, okay, what's the vibe you about to set? Like what music y'all playing? What y'all got burning? What's going on? And so like a lot of it is rooted in finding an appreciation of that and having since I moved to DC, I don't think I've been to a white person's house. I think I've been to maybe 2 white people's houses in the last like 10 years. And then thinking about like when they get to come into my house, like what is the experience that they're having and what's the difference in the experiences and like how we create our cultural experiences.
Mhm.
And so, like a lot of my work right now is centered on showing rooms and scenes in rooms. When I first got into that, I was using a lot of African fabric, and I started to kind of delve into the history of the fabric, because I'm very particular about, like, if there's symbols and whatnot in it, I need to understand the symbols. Because, like, you could put death and brokenness, innocent symbols onto your painting and mess up your whole life. Like, I'm into the vibration of that. So I was like, I need to know where these come from. And so as I'm learning the history of how these fabrics that we use, that are like these African fabrics, these Ankara fabrics, come from a Dutch process. And a lot of the traditional quote unquote African fabrics that we see or that we engage with are actually Dutch symbols and like Dutch political messages. And so that became very fascinating to me, about the power of textile and the design of textile to define a culture. Because like the Dutch, as they migrated beyond Africa, didn't continue it because their culture doesn't like colors like that. They thought it was too colorful, it's too much stuff together. And so the African cultures evolved it into, because we love colors like that.
We do.
So for me, it made me reconnect then to, as a Black American and as somebody who identifies as an American and as a Black American, like, I can't trace back, unfortunately, my specific ancestor to there is no one specific village that I can be from at this point in my life. It made me think about, like, how do we as Black Americans design? How do we engage textile? How do we engage color? How do we, and that led me into really learning about like Afrocobra, and how Afrocobra, like, their writings around how they engage color. Bisa Butler is somebody I've listened to countless talks of hers, talking about her experience at Howard with these teachers from Afrocobra and the challenges that they issued to her in dealing with colors, and in comparing the ways that we engage with color and the ways that traditional color blocking has been viewed. And I think that there's something that we do that is different, or that is more evolved than the traditional concepts of how colors relate and how colors move and how colors engage together. So all that to say that in my work, like, as I'm creating, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about like the history in with Pan-Africanism and with the diaspora, how we're connecting these textiles, how I engage in African textile versus like, what is a Black American textile? And there really isn't one, like kente cloth doesn't belong to me, or like Ankara fabric actually doesn't belong to me. And so what is a textile design that does belong to me? And, so then I'm looking at the quilt patterns that have been developed from, my ancestors who were enslaved, and the messaging that they created, like in braids and in the ways that we fashion ourselves, and the ways and that we articulate so many more messages in how we assemble our outfit, how we put our hair together. And that's fascinating. And so I want my work to give those messages. Like, I feel like when you stand in front of one of my pieces, if you're Black, it says something to you, that you get the language, because we're speaking in a language. There's a specific, like, like, this is the room that your mama said that you can't go in, like, we all know what that is. We all have somebody in our family that has a room that you can't go in, that there's plastic on all the furniture. And, like, the fact that this person is posing here in this room is like a moment, because they cannot be in this room. Or like, this is my, my mom, my husband's mom has a hat room for all her church hats. And that's where her makeup, and like, that's where she does her thing, and she gets ready, and then she selects her hats, and she rotates her hats by season. She has this incredible collection, and like the importance of like the church crown. And so just a painting of a woman with the crown, what that says to us. And it's a specific conversation to us, but then to others, it's a glimpse into the incredibleness of us. And I think that I really want to continue to contribute to what is Black American culture as a whole. Like, who are we now? I'm 5-6 generations deep on this land, at least. This is its own thing now. Yeah. And this is what it looks like. And it pulls from Africa because, we always nod to where we're from. But it's also evolved from just Africa.
I like it. I got 2 more questions, and then I got 2 rapid fire questions for you. So, speak on the importance of engaging young people in the arts.
Oh, so let me not rant on this either. I think that one of the things that we do that has to stop is that we tell young people that there's no money in art and that they should not pursue the arts because it's not a viable career. And I think that especially as Black art, and I think that across the board, but especially as Black artists, when we talk about like the difficulties in getting into certain museums and that there's no curators at certain levels and whatnot, we have to hold some responsibility in that, because part of that is us discouraging our young people from pursuing opportunities in the arts. Like, there's so many ways to be successful in the arts. I taught art for years. I helped nonprofit organizations develop art programs from zero-based budgets for years. I've curated. I had a workshop last year with some kids from Montgomery County, and I told them I was a curator, and they were like, what is that? They had never heard that term before. And so like the idea that you could go to college, you could study art, you could learn how to draw or paint with the best of them, but that's going to enable you to get an opportunity working for a museum, which opens doors for you bringing in people who are underrepresented, is very rarely talked about. The security guards at a lot of these Smithsonians have degrees. Like, they're not just standing there in the corner to just stand there in the corner. If you start asking them some questions about the art, they will start spitting with you about art history and art and their degrees in art. Like, these are studied people and they're making decent money. Like, we have to stop telling people that there's no money in art and then start exposing them to people who are working in art and maybe working alternatively, because realistically, it's just like being a rapper or an NBA player. Like, everybody's not going to be a famous artist, right? Yeah. That's real. And so, you want to make sure that like there's other ways to go, but also just like being an NBA player or a musician, everybody don't gotta be Jay-Z. Like, you could be a regionally successful musician and be doing your thing, and nobody's ever heard of you like all around the world, but you paying your bills, you living your best life, you supporting your family, you're making art that you love, you're being supported in different ways. Like, I also think we need to adjust that. Like, everybody is not going to be Basquiat, and like Basquiat's story is actually really devastating. And so like, that's not really goals. And I think shifting that of like, like I'm not represented by a gallery. I'm not in every magazine. I'm not in every, but I make that money. Like, I sell my work. I got a good following of people who I built myself on Instagram and Facebook, and just like doing group shows and just out doing my thing and like networking with people. I pay my bills and then some, and I'm happy. And I'm in museums, but you might not have ever heard of me. Like, you might have heard of Visa Butler. Yeah, that's cool. You might not have heard of me like you heard of Delita Martin. That's cool. I might not have a $10,000 print limited edition coming out this year yet. That's cool. You can still hit my site and you could get the $1,200 limited edition. That makes me equally happy right now. Yeah. And so I think like adjusting expectations and just having honest conversations. I wish artists had more opportunities to interface with young people more. And I feel like that's a hard thing with the Rona too. Is like, I used to get, it was easier for us to like go to schools and talk to kids or invite kids to come to exhibitions so we could talk to them. And that has become increasingly difficult, but we have to start encouraging, like when your kids express that they're interested in art, encourage that. And like put them in position for that, position them for that. That's a realistic goal. That's a realistic dream. There's multiple careers and ways to make artwork.
Yeah, I agree. This is the last real question. And what would you say your number one way to ensure that you're growing and you're developing as an artist? Because I think some people either go a little bit too extreme, and then it's just like, all right, you're going too far. And then some people aren't going far enough, and it's just like, all right, this is a little stagnant. And then, like I look at what I do with this. I try to continually progress. I try to ask more interesting questions, do more research, or take a different angle at it. So it still feels fresh and interesting to me. So applying that, how do you maybe apply that approach to your work?
I love that you said research. I grew up in a household that got the Encyclopedia Britannica set every year. So I'm very, very much about studying the business of what it is that you do. And so, like when I'm in the studio, I got videos on about a myriad of informational things. So, right now, it's a great hustle when you're on social media. So I'm watching like how to make your Instagram pop, how to make your Facebook pop, how to work, how to work with the algorithms and things so that I'm engaging my main sales source. I'm watching how to paint instructional videos, like watching different people's techniques. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm listening to like what different people say that they do and like where they're showing at, because people give so much jewels away just in the podcast when they're just talking about, just like how we're shooting the shit right now. People just give so many jewels away. They give away, ways that tools that they use, the ways that they approach the artwork, places they go, things like that. So, I'm listening to that, like soaking up what everybody's process is. I go to hella art shows and art exhibits that aren't even mine. Like if I see artists I like, I'm going to go to their exhibits. I'm going to go see, like if somebody represents them, I'm going to go see what they got at their gallery. Like I love Bisa Butler. So we went to New York, we went to Claire Oliver, and then we got there, we saw Gio Suavi when we was there, and like got to see some of the other textile artists that they work with. And you kind of get to have a comparative conversation of like, I'm looking at her work and I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm right here. I could do this. Or, we saw in Zsudayka I'm butchering her name, Crosby. We saw one of her pieces at the African Smithsonian, and the security was laughing at me because I was like up on it, like looking at how she cut and like what is a symbol and what is paint and what is digital transfer and what is, and like,
put that magnifying glass down.
Yes. And like, okay, do I need to make my cut cleaner? Do I need to make my, and it, what is a jewel I think a lot of people overlook is reading the comments under people whose art you like. Like I'm on Patrick Doer's page and like reading the comments under and like, what are people complimenting? They're complimenting the cut, the precision of the cuts, the precision of the line work, with my husband's work, he draws all his sections out in Sharpie and paints inside of that without, like, his precision is fire. And so like collectors are like, man, you didn't have to go back and do the Sharpie line. Like they could tell that. And so that tells me something about like how I'm going to assemble my pieces. And so I like to sit up under a lot of elders. I always keep an elder mentor. I always keep somebody who's in their like 60s, 70s, 80s. And I just go be around them and be quiet, and just go listen and just go take them some food. What can I help you with? You need me to sweep your studio up? Like, I'm not even here to like ask you. I'm not here to even ask you to critique me, or like, I'm here to just be quiet and just like take in what they already know. And they give you that information when you do that anyway. Like I think one of the best critiques I ever had was James Lee Brooks out of Atlanta when I was living in Atlanta briefly. Looked at my work and was like, you're talented, but you don't understand nothing about color. And I'm self-taught. So at that time, it never occurred to me to study color. I was like, oh, I just like to paint, and that's that on that. Like you just learn how to paint and you paint some and people might like it and they might not. He was like, no, you need to study color. And that changed my whole career. That changed my whole life. Like I started getting books, I'm like Joseph Alberts and all of them, like really studying the color. And that changed like how I compose things. So just being quiet and listening to like elder people, but studying, you got to study. If you're doing anything that you love to do, you got to study it.
That's huge. And I think that's a couple of gems right there. So here's a rapid fire. Got two rapid fire questions, and thank you for all of the insight. There is a lot of insight there. So rapid fire. The way this is going to work is these are two questions. They're brief. They're brief questions. Yeah, let's say you don't have to provide any extra context unless you really think it's necessary. Because some people are like, well, let me give you this is my favorite movie, but it's like, no, what's your favorite movie? It is, you can say like right now is my favorite movie, but you don't have to go. All right. So I read that you're attracted to wearing loud and bright colors, and you kind of echoed that earlier a little bit about black people and colors. So what are 3 colors that are specifically attractive to you?
Purple is my favorite color. I like to pair purple with like turquoise, teals, and then like an orange or yellow, which is actually 4 colors.
I feel like I've seen a picture that has that color way in there.
Yes, definitely. Like that is my thing. We went on a trip to New York. I found this fluorescent orange blazer. Yeah. And we was like driving down the street. I was like, loud as fuck. Like I need that.
I like muted colors. Like I'm always in gray and burgundy. I look like I'm Alabama like colors or what have you, like from the football team, like Roll Tide. So
right. You ready for the new Washington Commanders color theme?
The Commodores? No, I'm not here for it.
Did you call them the Commodores?
Yes. I'm not here for it.
Forever.
It's like, y'all just keep coming with the L's.
So say goodbye.
because you said this earlier, and I knew it was going to be in there. Favorite movie? I can add a caveat to it because you're a movie person. Favorite bad black movie, since we were talking. See? See, I catered it specifically to you.
Put me on the spot for my favorite bad black movie. What's a bad black movie I will always watch? You know what? I don't know if I could give you a movie off top, but my favorite bad black TV series is Monogamy. And I know I had mentioned monogamy to you in our like pre-show comments, but for those who haven't watched Monogamy, and I know you said you haven't watched it, it is a show about 4 couples who are like on the brink of divorce, and so they switch partners. Which you already know this sounds like a train wreck, right?
Yeah.
But then all this information starts coming out about how they're like previously connected through other things, and it gets messy and like wild in ways that like when I started out, I was like, this is so ridiculous. Like, I'm just not about to go live with another dude and another person come and stay with my husband. How is this fixing the marriage? And then you'd be like, oh.
Word?
Oh.
So that's what y'all doing.
Oh. And it just gets, it's so bad. It's so good. It's just like
it's just junk food.
Oh, it's so good. I would recommend it to everybody.
Okay.
Y'all should write write the black media, the black TV network that it's all black network. And ask them for more Monogamy. Like it's so fire. You're gonna watch it because I said all this, and you're gonna email me and be like, me and my girl is like on this.
I like when they do a spinoff of a show and it's like Monogamy : polygamy. It's like, what season is this? Like, who's in this one? Really? Him? So that's all I have. I want to thank you for being on the podcast.
Can I give you my favorite
Please.
white movie too? Because
Sure.
I don't want to say white movie because it's not a white movie. There's a bunch of white folks in this movie, but it's like a general.
No,
Because
please.
I know you said you got a film. So I don't know are you a Charlie Kaufman fan?
Not particularly.
So Adaptation.
Okay.
Which is directed and written by, well, I don't want to say written. I feel like it was written and directed by Charlie Kaufman. Have you seen that?
No, I've not. 2002. Yeah. 20th anniversary.
Fantastic. It is starring Meryl Streep, who anything Meryl Streep does and she plays just such a variety of characters. But it is about Meryl Streep trying to figure out her passion and like what she loves. And Nicolas Cage, who is a terrible actor, but he's fantastic in this movie that's out now called Pig, which is a whole side conversation. Anyway, Nicolas Cage, he plays twin brothers and he's trying to like write a screenplay.
Uh-huh.
And it all is like, it's just this messy thing that comes together. But there is this scene where Meryl Streep is interviewing this guy and he's like just kind of this weird guy. He's always collecting different things, but he takes people on a trek to find ghost orchids out in the jungle, just like some really random stuff. And she was like, what led you to this? Like, what is it about orchids? And he says to her this monologue about how with the orchid, every single orchid looks like a bug in existence. And the key is and it calls for that bug. So he was talking about how like the key to life is finding your flower, like finding the thing that is most connected to you and that is reflective of you and that is most like you. And it's just such I go back and I watch it all the time just for inspiration of like remembering to make sure that I'm finding my flower.
I love it. I'll watch it. Cause it looks interesting. Cause I remember the poster for, cause it's like, I think Nicolas Cage's head is a pot or something. Yeah. I'll give it a shot. And, it's a 20th anniversary. So that might be worth reviewing.
Oh my God. Is it that old? Am I that old?
2002. Yeah.
Yeah, you should. I would love to hear what you think about it because it's just such a very like layered and nuanced film. And there's so many different aspects. And it's one of his, like, I would say best, like I have two performances of his because otherwise I'm very like, okay, Nick, it's Nick playing Nick. Like you couldn't even switch your face and not be Nick.
Stop.
But
That's great.
But he's great in this and he's great in this film, Pig. Have you seen Pig?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
Pig. On the short list, though.
Pig is on Hulu. Pig. Nicolas Cage had me spend 2 hours looking for his truffle pig. Like, no, I know it sounds crazy. Like, you will be like, what happened to his pig, though? Well, where the pig at? Like, 2 hours, I was like, where is this pig? And I was in the studio. So, like, if your movie makes me put my brush down or, like, I'm standing in the middle of the room, like... That's me. I was like standing in the middle of the room, like, where's the pig?
I say that whenever I go to a barbecue. It's like, yo, where's the pig?
Listen, my husband got me back on the pig.
Yeah, we out here. Swan gang, It's like wow. So let's wrap up here. I want to invite you to tell the fine folks where to follow you to see more of your work, your website, all of that good stuff. Feel free to tell the folks where to check you out.
So my website is terrellartsdc.com. That is TERRELL artsdc.com. And if you jump on the website, we are actually a virtual art center and we offer a lot of workshops and a lot of different content and opportunities to learn about art and engage in art. And we also do like teacher educator art trainings. So you can come on and book us and check out some art. And then the best place to follow me, I would say, is on Instagram, which is at Zsudayka, Z as in Zoo, SUDAYKA.
So there you have it, folks. I want to thank again Zsudayka for coming on to the podcast. We'll wrap up here. So for Zsudayka Nzinga, Terrell, I am Rob Lee saying that there is art in and around your city. You just got to look for it.